Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the EasyPower Tuesday Refresher. My name is Jim Chastain. I'm with the Applications Group at EasyPower. Today we're going to be talking about custom arc flash labels in EasyPower. And as always, I'd like to start with a poll question. If you would please participate. And today's question is about labels. So if you would please vote on the topic. And that is, how often would custom labels be useful? Here's how folks weighed in on this one. And then our next question is relating to how often you would change labels normally in an arc flash compliant program. So here's how everyone voted here. And again, thank you for participation. So let's jump into the material. So the agenda is basically to go through the mechanics of producing labels, period, and then we'll get into the ability or what it takes to customize any part of the label for your particular needs. And then we'll wind up with a special customization that I've done that has been requested and apparently is more popular in Canada than in the US, and that is having the ability to add a QR code which permits anyone to scan the label and be able to identify additional information from the QR code. Then we'll also talk about how to print them, the printer interface that's in EasyPower, and then in addition, if you prefer, being able to utilize a third-party printer by printing the labels to a PDF form. So inside of or within the EasyPower installation, there's somewhere between 15 and 20 different templates installed, and they vary mainly by the size and in some cases different content. And so the process that's used to customize is to find the template you want, start making adjustments, save that modified template file with a different name so you're not contaminating the basic templates. And then your ability or the tool allows us to take any information that's on the arc flash hazard spreadsheet and put it into label for informational purposes only. And I'll notify or kind of emphasize that you can construct your label completely from scratch, and the tool allows customization inclusively or exclusively based upon what it is you're trying to do. So ANSI Standard Z 535.4 includes a fair amount of information regarding hazardous warning labels, and they tend to recommend 3 color schemes based upon the varying degree of the hazard, where caution is just mostly an informational warning, informational tag that gives us additional information for anyone in the area. Warning is about a hazard that could cause injury, human injury or equipment injury, and then danger is pretty much allocated to potential for mortal injury. Now, there are documentations and there are details regarding each of these labels in terms of the color scheme, the fonts, the position of the warning label, the standard triangle versus the rest of the label. And I'm not going to be getting into any of that. I'm just going to be jumping into the EasyPower options that allow us to make modifications that suit our particular facility or plant. Now in NFPA 70E, under Article 130.5H specifically, there's a paragraph or two on what the equipment labeling is required for arc flash hazards. And the label should include incident energy and working distance or PPE category, but not both. And that is, if I've calculated incident energy, I cannot reference a PPE category of any type or form, especially if it references the PPE lookup table, or more specifically, we can't utilize the old HRC category, which was in effect prior to 2015. It also indicates you need to have a minimum arc rating of clothing. Now, all three of these, the incident energy and working distance, specifies what the PPE category or rating should be. So that one piece of information covers a fair amount of the requirements. But then arc flash boundary, maybe date of study, the upstream fed device. There are a lot of other information that could be useful and may or may not be part of this particular article. Now in EasyPower, we do get the question, Jim, I understand that according to NFPA 70E, we're not supposed to put a PPE category on the label. Frequently, people will say, well, the customer still wants to have a PPE category on there, no matter what NFPA 70E states. So I'm just going to point this out as we get in the tool. The label editor allows us to include that, and it's a special checkbox, if you will, inside the arc flash controls, and I'll touch on that as we get there. We get into the tools. So again, it is possible to put it on there, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So here's what a typical example looks like, showing the arc flash boundary and working distance. So in this case, the arc flash boundary is 10 inches, the incident energy is 0.5 calories, and the working distance is 18 inches. And in the case of PPE, there's a reference to table 130.5G, which is part of NFPA 70E, the current version, which describes the type and covering PPE required, and the indication is as long as it meets 0.5 calories, which is a requirement of this bus, then we are safe to utilize the PPE as described in the table. Then in addition, there's the voltage, shock hazard indications, boundaries for limited approach and restricted approach. In this case, we're including the equipment name and then the upstream device which feeds this bus, and presumably we would be able to de-energize it by going to that location. And then, as I indicated, the date applied is good information. So in the order of events, as far as the mechanics of using EasyPower, and this is where we're going to jump into next, first thing we want to do is complete our calculations as far as incident energy, short circuit current, and the timing devices, and produce an arc flash hazard spreadsheet. By utilizing the spreadsheet as the data source, we can then access the information and the label editor, and from there we can locate a template, be able to modify it, and add QR code. So let's do that right now. So here's a one-line diagram. I'm in EasyPower. We're going to go to short circuit focus. Now I mentioned we need to have an arc flash hazard spreadsheet. The arc flash hazard spreadsheet is a required document, and if I go to short circuit options, again, I'm in the short circuit focus. If I go to short circuit options, the arc flash hazard tab, these two documents here indicate an arc flash hazard spreadsheet and an arc flash threshold. This is the spreadsheet that I'm referring to. So if you go to vault all the buses, and at this point we're displaying the short circuit current, use the arc flash icon to calculate incident energy, and we've done all of our mitigation and coordination, so we're happy with the results. I like to use the Arrange for Arc Flash icon here at the top center because it displays the one-line diagram and the data behind these calculations. So this bottom spreadsheet is referred to as the Arc Flash Hazard Report, and that is what I produced when I filled in this checkbox on the Arc Flash Hazard tab. Now, while I'm here, I mentioned that sometimes we want to have, so customers want to have an indication of PPE level. If I go to the Advanced tab, again, I'm on the Arc Flash Hazard tab of the short circuit options. If I go to the Advanced tab, the tool will allow me to show the PPE level, which then can be put on the label. So this is the button that allows me to circumnavigate that particular restriction. So you'll notice I left it unchecked. So we're going to go back to our Arrange for Arc Flash display. Now, as I look at my one-line diagram in short circuit focus, these are the icons at the top of the focus banner which are available. But if I select the Arc Flash Hazard Report by clicking on the spreadsheet anywhere down on the second half of the screen, the bottom part, I get a new set of icons at the top, one of which is the label icon. And by invoking that, I go to the label interface, the label printer interface, and this allows me to print the labels as they stand with whichever template I've selected. Now, if I haven't started the process, the first thing I want to do is go through and find the template that suits my needs. And what we're looking here is the physical size of the label itself. So this is a 4x6 die cut. Here's a 4x6 die cut with a warning as of 2012. And part of 2012 warning was allowing the PPE level on there. Die cut with warning 2015 does not have the PPE level on there. And without the warning means that there's no, so the reason I would use this if I have a label stock that includes the warning icon or band at the top and I don't have to print it from the printer, then that's what I would use instead. Now what I've selected and what I've chosen to modify is a standard 4x6 with multicolor. And once I've selected that, I've been able to make some adjustments there. And the kind of adjustments and to do that, I would go into my label designer up here at the top, design labels. Again, I pick out the standard that I want to use, and I would start with one that hasn't been modified, but once I select it, and I start the editor. Now the editor, you'll notice up here we don't have any save icons illuminated, and that's because no changes have been made. As soon as I make a change, let's say whether this is a template or my final design, I don't like the verbiage arc flash and shock risk assessment. I'm really talking about the hazard involved, not the risk. And let's say I'm a purist in that regard, so I want to take out the word risk. So to do that, I'm looking at the text. So what we have available by entering the designer label designer, is the editor, if you will, that writes the HTML code for the label layout. So what we've selected is this particular block of text, and over here is the contents of that block. Let's say I want to take out the risk nomenclature. So I just back space there. Now I've made changes to the current template. And so if I wanted to save these templates, I save the edits as a new file. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as Jimbo, just so I can find it. And it's going to put it in this folder that's an EasyPower 10.0 Arc Flash labels. So it knows to keep that with the project, that particular pointer. So now once I pick that, select Jimbo, go in and edit it, I can finish the remainder, and you'll notice now it has the base design without that particular word. Now, in terms of editing, every part of this label is modifiable. Right now I selected the external rectangle, which shows the dimensions, the starting point, the X and Y starting point, the width and the height that I can modify if I want to make it larger or smaller for whatever reason. And in this case, we've made the fill color by default. So this is the fuzzy logic that can be adjusted. By default, the fill color is orange, and we made the condition that if the incident energy is greater than or equal to 40, the fill color will go to red. Now, I don't have any, in this particular example, I don't have any buses that have incident energy greater than 15. If you'll notice over here in the bottom right-hand corner, most are less than 1, and I have one bus that's greater than 14. So just for an example's sake, and I would not do this in a real project, I leave the limit at 40, but let's, just because I want to see this work, the fuzzy logic work, let's set my incident energy range or threshold at 12. And so by default, the fill color is orange. If the incident energy gets greater than 12, it's going to go to red. So let's scroll through the buses and see what's going to change. And we notice that the only bus that's greater than 0.5 is the main, and sure enough, when I get to the main, I'm showing a red fill color, and that's because it's exceeded this incident energy level that we set at 12. So this was just an example. I'm going to put this back to 40 just to prove the point. And then my main bus goes back to warning. Now the same is true for text. So in this case, we've selected the warning. The text itself, by default, is warning. If I wanted to put an exclamation point for whatever reason, if I wanted to put special characters, if I wanted to spell it different, whatever works for my particular system, the tool lets me do that. And so by default, now when I look at any one of the buses, I have the warning text that includes the exclamation point. Now we've made that conditional as well. By default, the text is warning, exclamation point. Again, if it goes above 40 calories, the text will change to danger. So I have now built into this one printer information that modifies the label based upon the data that's coming off of the spreadsheet down at the bottom. Okay, likewise, if we come down here and look at this block that's highlighted, that's the text or the variable arc flash boundary, which is pulled from the spreadsheet down below. And so as I scroll through the buses, and the one that's going to be different is going to be main, is 8 foot 4 inches and 8 feet 4 inches. And what we're looking for is the arc flash boundary. Estimated arc flash boundary in inches. If we look at main, it's down at 99.7 inches, which is probably going to be somewhere around 8 foot 4 inches. 99.7 inches. Got it. All right. So that's how I make the data show up. For instance, by selecting this block, this is our incident energy block. By selecting this, this is our kilovolts on this particular bus, and it's pulling that information off of the database. Now we can add any variable on any of these locations. Let's say I wanted to add a variable after this, and I can't think of one that I would, but once I add a variable, I can select it from the select list, and these include all the data that's in the arc flash calculations. So if I wanted to say, okay, this is the scenario that's associated with this particular set of information, then I can do that as well. And again, we can make it conditional if we wanted to do that. Okay, so every piece of the label, let's say I wanted to put my logo on here. My logo ends up being a JPEG file, so I'm going to insert the JPEG image. The top focus banner, right-hand side, insert image. The last image I worked with was the danger triangle with a black warning triangle, so I'm going to point to a different folder where my JPEG files are. Let's say Alfred E. Newman was my logo for whatever reason, and I could position that and size that thusly. If I wanted to put my contact information, I would end up putting the text, and it starts out right here. Bring it to the place I want it to show up. And by so doing, then, this information, because it's not conditional on anything, it's going to show up on every label. All right, so we can draw elements, we can draw lines, we can make thicker, fatter, shorter, longer, insert circles and ellipses, and images if we so desire. Okay, now this brings me to, and as you see, as I scroll through these buses, I have this QR code showing up. So the request was, if my electricians go by this bus or this panel 5 times a day, they're not even going to look at it if the information hasn't changed in 5 years. So I want them to be able to scan the panel or the label on the panel and record the voltage and current that they read on the panel. So effectively a manual data acquisition system. So what we did for this customer, or what the tool allows us to do for this customer, is insert a QR code, and we associated it with the device code in the database, and I'll show you that in a second, because this is a unique, every bus in the system by default, by definition, has a unique identifier, so we're using that as our device code, and once they scan that, we were able then to take information pertaining to this particular bus and put it in a HTML page behind our firewall. And now they're able, if you were to scan this particular QR code, turns out I just happen to have my little phone set up to do that. If we scan this particular page, it'll take you to a dummy page that we set up behind the firewall that lets us enter the voltage, current, and power, I think. If we go to bus 2 and we scan that one, this will take us to a description of the PPE that's required for this particular bus. All right, so I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to go ahead and save these edits. Let's go ahead and save the template as Jimbo. What I want to do is go back to my one-line diagram. If I go to database edit, I can see on bus 1A, which is the first place we had a QR code, that I've entered my ID name, copied and pasted it into my device code. And so if that device code doesn't show up, in other words, on bus 5 I don't have it, this QR code will not be displayed on that label. So what I have done is I want to label bus 2, bus 2A, and bus 1A. So here's bus 2A. Now we didn't have one on bus 2, so I'm going to copy my ID name, paste it in my device code, and now that's going to be in the database. And once I go to my label editor and it sees that I have a device code for bus 2, it will create a QR linkage for me. So let's do this. I'm going to go back to my Arrange for Arc Flash, go to the Arc Flash hazard spreadsheet, enter the label editor, And from here, we're going to pick out the same template we were using before. And now, as I scroll through, you can see on bus 2, I have a QR code. Now, if I go into the label edit, the label designer, you can see how this label is constructed, or the QR code is constructed. Because the device code is unique, this will change with every change in the device code that comes from the database. But now if you were to go in and scan this particular QR code, what you will see is I've taken a screenshot of the one-line diagram. And if you scan this code and go to that particular website, what you will see is a screenshot of my one-line diagram. And that looks like this. So the idea was to be able to give the electrician or anyone that walks up to that panel and scans that QR code a snapshot of the one-line diagram with information that pertains to his responsibilities or need to know in terms of maintenance that he needs to do. So where would I use that? Clearly, if I have several contractors coming on site from different companies and I have to debrief each on my hazardous situations or my hazards, it would be relatively easy to make part of my discussion or debrief daily to have anybody in the area scan the label and receive the updated information that I can then impart on that particular part of my web page. Okay, so that covers the topics we were talking about. I do want to mention that Windows has EasyPower has a Windows print driver built in. And for those of you that stay current on the maintenance agreement, a fair amount of that support is involved. Anytime there's a Windows update, we take great pains to make sure that EasyPower is able to interface with the drivers that change in Windows impacts, and consequently any printer that has Windows drivers in it we should be able to interface with. On the other hand, if you have a special driver or a special printer, it is worth verifying from our web page. We have a list of printers that we have tested if you have questions about which printers are compatible with EasyPower tools. We also saw that there's a wide selection of templates that we can start with, and we can customize any template for our specific project, including images, custom text, custom diagrams, and JPEG if you want to include more information than's on there and that's in a basic label. You can also extend that by utilizing the QR code capability. So at this point, I guess I'm open for questions if we haven't made everything clear. I do want to thank everyone for attending. What does Abe? The Alfred E. Newman looks just like the label that I showed on the one-line diagram. Is what you see is what you get, and that's the advantage of that particular editor, is that whatever it is I put on, let me take a step back. I appreciate the question, but let's kind of go back and do that. I didn't. So here's my Alfred E. Newman, and what I want to do is print this particular, so let's save this and then print it to a, so it will look exactly like this. So now we need to jump out of this. We can print it either straight to a label or to a JPEG device. Let's see. Well, this is a print preview right here. This is what it looks like. So anyway, appreciate everyone from attending. Thank you for the questions. We've announced other regional training sites on the location, so check those out. And for those of you that haven't heard, we have available now online training, which is a recorded version of the regional training for those of you that cannot travel. Thank you all again for attending, and we'll talk to you next week. Have a good day.